Um, so let's dive into the topic of organizing teams. Um, it's cool because when you think about it, what brings people joy in their day-to-day work differs so much from person to person. Some people, it's the teams they get to work with. For some people, it's the technologies they're exposed to. For others, it's the business problems they get to solve. And some, it's a combination of all three. Uh, However, what saps joy from our workplaces tends to be a common set of issues that affect you no matter if you're in a small company or a big company, whether you're in whatever the industry is that you're in, or even the geography. And these kinds of issues that I'm going to talk about today are messes. Uh, so enter Marie Kondo, who I find extremely inspiring when we're talking about handling different kinds of messes you might be encountering in your job. Marie Kondo is cool for so many reasons, a few including the fact that she started a consultancy at 19. She's written 4 books, has a Netflix series, and she's been named one of Time's most influential people. Uh, but what's really, really great about Marie Kondo is the fact that her clients have such tremendous results. If you're not familiar, what she's famous for is essentially teaching people how to organize. Their house, their physical space. Her process is very structured and involves going through all of the things you own and getting rid of anything that does not, quote, spark joy, which is crazy because all you have to do is just get rid of your stuff and you start having a significantly better life. There's the obvious benefit, of course, that now you have fewer things to maintain. Cool. I like not having as many responsibilities, but there's even more that her clients tend to find. Marie Kondo's clients find that without the weight of the unnecessary mess in their life, they're happier, they're healthier. A large number of them report that they're able to reach for goals that always felt a little out of reach, like running marathons or starting a business. And ultimately, this is one of my favorite things that we can learn from Marie Kondo, which is the idea that the environment around your work has such a tremendous impact on what you actually produce. So, like I said, I really love tending to messes in my work, and that doesn't mean cleaning up people's desks. The messes that I find are impacting my team the most are things like impossible file systems or documentation systems where you can't find any information unless you have a good search, and somehow we never have a good enough search to help us find what we're looking for. It's really busy calendars that don't allow time for breaks. This one is especially getting to me now as I get IMs all hours of the day. And it's so hard to get even an hour of heads down work in to really accomplish the things I need to do. And then for developers, the biggest mess that we encounter is often messy code. This is, of course, minimized code, but you know the situations where you've run into a code base that feels just like this. We're going to go through different strategies that you can use to clean up these kinds of messes. And these strategies are going to apply to any kind of process that impacts your team. So hopefully some of these strategies you can apply today, but if nothing else, the big thing I want you to walk away from today with is the thought that improving how your team works is just as important as what you're working on. You can have the most brilliant technologists and you can write really wonderful code, but if you don't have the processes in place to enable your team, you're going to be far less successful than if you put a little bit more care into making the way the team works more efficient. The first topic that I really love to talk about in here and has been extremely relevant in this lockdown world is time in the form of meetings. I am the weird developer that adores meetings. Some of my favorite moments in the workplace have been when me and my coworkers get together and debate or brainstorm, and together we're able to come up with ideas that are significantly better than anything I could have done on my own. My workplace also enforces paired programming and a lot of collaboration, and getting together to work with people is the only way we can really accomplish that. But especially as the occasional drive-by has become less of a possibility, what I'm tending to find is it's really easy to see people not manage meetings well. I looked around for where I could find solid numbers on how much time we waste in meetings. It turns out neither you or me has missed that global survey about how many meetings do you attend a day and how useful do you think they are. So we don't really have a great data set. But I loved this Lucid Meetings blog that broke down a guesstimate at what what number of hours were wasted per day in the US across kind of everybody's calendars. And the rough guess was around 20 million. If I took the calculations they had and applied it to the working population in Europe, the EU, it was around 31 million. It could be significantly worse. I think this was a reflection of roughly 20% of meetings that we thought wasted time. But the idea that this much productivity has been lost is crazy. And it seems to be so common. I do a lot of work with my developers, even though they aren't running meetings perhaps as often as a project manager or a business analyst. I work with them to make sure, one, they know how to run an effective meeting, and two, they know what they should expect from someone running a meeting that they're in, to make sure their time is being used as wisely as possible. The first piece that comes to running an effective meeting should be the first piece that comes to any process you're going to enact. I'm going to introduce these principles throughout the conversation today because while they'll be relevant to the topic at hand, they're really relevant to every single process that your team works with. And the first one is this: single purpose. Everything you do should only have one single focused purpose. You can certainly accomplish multiple things with one meeting or multiple gains with one process. But at the end of the day, if you have multiple goals, instead of accomplishing two things, you're more likely to accomplish nothing. We've been in the meeting that takes an hour and then you leave and wonder, what did we just do? Why are we even here? And if you arrive to a room or a video call and you don't know why you're there, that's a really bad sign to start. So an easy way to make sure you're doing this is to state the objective in the invite of the meeting. The second piece is, if you have a goal, you should probably have some steps for how we're going to get there. That's in meeting lingo, an agenda. This is a huge thing for my company. We actually had so many problems with it for a while that if you sent out a meeting, even still, if you send out a meeting without an agenda, a lot of people will just straight up reject it because they don't see any evidence that you are going to be using their time wisely. So these are the first two big things that you as a meeting host should be bringing in to make a meeting effective. It's also, as a meeting attendee, what you should be looking for to make sure this is going to be a good use of your time. The other half of making this meeting useful for everyone, there's my cat in the background. Told you guys he's going to make a appearance today, and he'll probably jump in later. But as a meeting attendee, what you need to do to ensure a meeting goes successfully is be engaged. Having engaged attendees is a sure sign that people in the meeting should be there. If you have one of those 20-person happy hours, you might have noticed it's actually not possible, or at least productive, for 20 people to talk at once. It's challenging to even get like 3 to 4 people on one of these calls where we have that, oh, wait, no, you go, sorry, I started talking, and we do that whole dance. To keep engaged participants, the easiest thing is to just limit the number of people that you actually have in a call or in a room at once. If they don't need to speak, it's super possible that they actually could just get an email and then get 30 minutes or an hour back in their lives. If they are needed, then you need them directly engaged and contributing to the conversation. And that brings me to the fourth piece, which is if you want a good meeting, you need to ensure there's no distractions. We see this a lot where people will be multitasking. Oh gosh, it's really bad right now as people get Teams. They can't come to my meeting without devices and shut off all their phones or laptops. Now they've got notifications interrupting as well. When we do get back to an offline meeting mode, I strongly encourage meetings where devices are banned. People pay significantly more attention when they don't have a screen to distract them. And we know by now, if you're attending to your email, then what we're discussing is probably not what you're focusing on. And it's signaling to everyone else in the room that it's not what's important right now. So if we accomplish these four things, having a meeting with a single goal, an agenda on how we're going to accomplish it, and then the attendees are engaged and give up their distractions for that short period of time, you tend to have shorter meetings. And shorter meetings are a good thing because it means I get more time to do the things that are on my plate and spend less time just kind of waiting for things to progress forward. And that's usually what I prefer. I like solving problems and doing the things that are on my to-do list. I don't like wasting time. A common theme here you're going to see is these are all what make up really good communication. And communication makes up this another area that we find a lot of mess in. As I mentioned earlier, it's the other thing developers are known for really loving: documentation. I have not met a lot of devs that adore documenting, but I've also not met any devs that could say it's not important. Without a good documentation system, you have a really significant problem with tribal knowledge, and ultimately your organization suffers for it. A lot of devs who maybe have been at a company for a while sometimes see this as job security, that if I know the secret sauce about what makes this project successful, I'm probably pretty safe to keep my job. And that might be true. Ultimately, though, you're probably not going to be on the job forever. Even in terms of you might get sick at some point and need a sick day. You might take a vacation at some point. And so there needs to be, for your team, a way to access the information you have, even when you're not there. And the really big thing is, maybe you really love what you do every single day, but I would bet, based on the fact that you are the type of people that come to an event like this to learn more about how to do things better and do new and different things, I bet you have other work you would like to get to someday. And you never can get to that if you are the only person that can solve the problems you're on right now. So it's easy to fall into this trap of tribal knowledge by yourself, but getting out of it usually requires the work of a collaborative team. The way that we handle this a lot at my company is through paired programming. I can't say enough about the benefits of pairing, especially as we've moved into this COVID-19 situation. It's been really remarkable to see the gains we've been able to make when we were able to find the right pairing tools to enable our development teams. But when it comes to addressing tribal knowledge, pair programming is especially great with a junior developer. If you are the person hoarding knowledge, you've probably forgotten a lot of what is not common for anyone just joining your organization. I suggest pairing with juniors who do the best job of asking questions and keeping a tally or an inventory of all of the topics that come up. The junior should be able to start filling out documentation with the assistance of the senior or knowledge hoarder and start addressing some of these things that are kind of just stuck in your head. And if you want to be really good at this, you'll actually bring in a third person who has not been exposed to the work to verify that it's working, the documentation is serving the goal you created. That brings me to the second principle of tidying, which is that you need to measure effectiveness. If you just write a bunch of documentation and you never test if it's actually doing the thing that you want, you have no way to know if you've actually contributed productively. We test our code to make sure that it's working. We have a whole quality assurance piece of this industry, but we rarely take this step with our documents. And even if you start to address your tribal knowledge problem, if you don't take the time to measure the effectiveness of what you're creating, you end up in kind of the opposite side of the spectrum, which I call drowning in information. One of my first jobs was working as a data integrator for an oil and gas company here in the US. And it was really, really cool. It was a 40-person team. And our data integration covered so many different departments, including the pieces that made us money, as well as finance and HR operations that would impact whether our employees got their retirement paid on time. Because we were the center point of so much and we had such a large team, we really were responsible for a lot. And we would frequently get called out when we were on on-call rotations to assist with outages. These outages were a particular nightmare, however, because of the documentation mess we got ourselves in. Somehow we ended up with 3 different places to document the jobs that would fail. And I don't know if you know what happens when you tell a developer to document the same thing in 3 different places. But generally, it just doesn't get documented in all of those places because it feels pretty pointless. And so what I would start to see when I started getting called out at 2 a.m. to solve random issues I have never touched before was that not only were there multiple places I had to go to find documentation, but sometimes it would be conflicting or just outright wrong because nobody had updated it. And that was even worse. Now someone has wasted their time writing this in the first place, and I've wasted precious moments in a job that has been clearly marked as a really, really important critical piece for the company, when I probably would have been better just starting at the code as if I had no documentation at all. I've seen this I see one of these 2 problems, either tribal knowledge or drowning in information, in most organizations I work with. When I'm working with the over the top levels of documentation, I have a small system that I use to kind of start organizing it and make it navigable, is what I really think of. If you can provide a map and help people find things without just solid search functionality, then you can really increase the productivity of what you have. And making something navigable really isn't difficult. The first piece is organizing it into categories. In a development space, you might see notes on developer setup, on common bugs, on business requirements. And once you start categorizing those different pieces, you'll find that you find some patterns. You might even find some things that overlap. And that's when you get to the simplify piece, where once things are put into common areas, you can start cutting things out. And then finally, I've always found creating quick reference pages, or almost like a table of contents, goes really far. People aren't necessarily going to be able to navigate naturally to every single thing you make. So if you can provide a single page that they can use as a starting point, you can really expedite their ability to navigate through the documentation system you have. And by doing this, what we're ultimately accomplishing is concise communication. You really, at the end of the day, documentation should have the fewest words possible and no fewer. You want to take up the least amount of time necessary, but still communicate as much as is needed. So all of your processes are indeed intended for a future process or for a future audience. You create meetings so that you can make a decision that will move the whole organization forward. You write documentation so that someone down the line will know something that you didn't know today. So it's really important you do this concisely. This should be a fairly familiar concept because it applies to our code as well. This is probably the most documentation and the most communication you do on a day-to-day basis, because we all know the code you're writing today is going to be the code for someone that has never encountered this issue before or has completely forgotten about it if it's you in 6 months and you don't remember why you built this. So we're going to talk about messy code really quickly. When we think of messy code, tech debt is what kind of comes to mind. So I'm going to borrow some of the concepts from the technical debt discussions, although really handling technical debt is a conversation of its own. But the big thing to know is that it's inevitable. And it's inevitable because your requirements change. If you knew what the requirements were going to be in 3 years, you might build your system differently. But ultimately, you probably don't know entirely, right? So you have to do the best with what you have. Tech debt is also going to come about because, as we know, technology changes so fast. Just over 2 years, I got a Pixel 2 phone, and now I'm reading about the Pixel 5, 3 generations forward. And I feel really, really out of date. And that's hardware. Software, it's even more rapid because we can do it so easily. And so we know the technology changes mean within 6 months, what you wrote before might not be applicable anymore. And the biggest thing, the biggest contributor to, nice, another Pixel 2 user. The biggest contributor, though, to messy code is the fact that people change. I sincerely hope that the code you write 3 months from now is way better than the code you're writing today, because you're attending events like this and you care about learning about the best way to do things. And as that updates, you're also going to look back at the way you did things previously and think that that might need to change. And you want to change it for sure. I think we all know the heavy weight that technical debt has. As a consultant, it's always rough to come into an organization and have people say things like, "Oh gosh, please don't judge me on that repository. That was a bad deadline. It was not our best work." Or sometimes they just outright won't show it to us because it's so rough. The biggest problem with technical debt is it really makes the job less enjoyable for everybody, and that's going to scare away your best talent. So the fix is obvious, hopefully to us, is that if you have a serious technical mess, you should clean it up. But for some reason, this concept gets lost a lot when it comes to our processes. It is so painful the number of times I've heard, "We do it this way because we've always done it this way," which really isn't a good reason to do anything. Because we know requirements, technology, and people change constantly, our processes will also need to change. You probably shouldn't have a different process every day for the same thing, but you should be reviewing them periodically to make sure they're still hitting that goal that you had before. A quick note on tidying your code base. If you do have a technical debt problem, some quick strategies to get into that actually are kind of similar to the organizing documentation. Inventory your problematic areas so that everybody is kind of agreed on this is something that needs fixing. Prioritize the areas that are high touch so that you're adding the most value quickly. And then use quality gates constantly. And the quality gates include things like linting, unit tests, code reviews, peer reviews. These things are what really take your messes from okay to fixed. And quality is really the base of this talk, the main topic. You can't pick and choose when you're going to do quality work. If it's going to be really effective and if your team's really going to be at its best, it should be taking pride in the craftsmanship of what it's creating throughout every step in the process. Not just quality code, but quality processes, quality time spent, as well as quality documentation that everybody can learn from. I'd struggle to find a point in the process that wouldn't benefit from really good thought that on how can we do this the best way. If you have a culture that values this, you'll see that a lot of these messes get resolved because it's what we take pride in and it's what makes the job really great. So to recap, the 4 principles that we kind of touched upon was having a single purpose for what you do, making sure you measure the effectiveness, that you communicate concisely for your future audiences, and that just because you've created this process doesn't mean it's going to stay the same, but that you continually reassess for the value it's bringing for your team. With that, I encourage you to take the Marie Kondo attitude, which is if you have mess, that's a great thing because it means you have an opportunity to improve what's going on for your team and for everyone around. And that's really the best thing you can do. So that's about all I have. Do we want to hand it over to Russ?
Yeah.
Or if there's questions, I know I said 11:40, but I could probably stick around a little bit longer.
So if you have any questions, so now, it's question time. What is the cat's name? Jason is very curious.
Chief.
She?
Chief.
Okay.
Like head honcho, because he is definitely in charge of this house.
So so everyone, there is opportunity to ask questions and feel free to do that. We will not judge you. Just go ahead. You can type it, or you can, well, if you can ask privately as well. Gabby is on the chat. Okay. Well, and here you go, Paulus.
Tools for paired programming.
Gabby, Gabby,
Yes,
could
Morgan.
you put up the last slice, the previous slice?
Here you go.
Thanks.
This guy? Yeah. I can share these slides too on Twitter. I casually share Gabby the dev on every single slide just in case to make sure it does not get lost. So I'll post these for reference afterwards. I know I kind of flew through there at the end. As for paired programming tools in the office, I have some coworkers that are very insistent that you need a setup that allows multiple monitors for the same screen. I've been very lucky to just benefit from screen sharing. In the current situation, though, I really highly recommend a tool called Use Together. Really remarkable. We talked about Microsoft Teams earlier today, but that has problems allowing me to access my peers' consoles, versus Use Together allows multiple cursors on the screen at once. We're actually liking it so much right now that we think we're going to use it once we're all back in the office, just because there's been so many efficiencies we've seen from it. So one of the most basic cases I seem to end up doing every time I change jobs to answer the question around examples of the map of information is creating new employee onboarding, because often those are the people that are pouring through your documentation the most. Creating a start here page, and then sorting through, this is where you want to go for technical information. This is where you want to go for questions around the business needs. Sometimes literally just creating a glossary of terms. I was blown away at my first couple jobs at the number of acronyms I had to pick up, and I'm starting to realize we just all love to shorten things and avoid saying as many syllables as we can, unless you're Russ, I guess, because he likes using confusing, lengthy words that are hard to say. But glossaries, kind of just categorizing things and helping people figure out, where do I start? If you're diving into technical documentation, what I've seen that's really great is breaking it out by level. So we have one single knowledge base where we have an introductory area if you're getting started, a intermediate area like, hey, if you really want to get good at this thing, check out this section of articles. And then a really advanced, like, hey, if you want to talk about the really random one-off cases that we've encountered, go in this direction. So a lot of different ways to do it. The big thing is just considering the categories. You actually do this process probably in your own code when you try to decide either the packages that you're going to break your code into or the folders, depending on kind of which language you're in. It's applying the same information organization to written documentation.
Yeah, I was looking more of the, maybe you have suggestions for some more sophisticated tool than with just basic Confluence.
Honestly, I think you can accomplish quite a bit with Confluence and READMEs. The core missing thing that I see is just people taking the time to organize it. We create the page and we say, great, how to set up this code I've made a Confluence page, but then we never give people a way to get to it. So with that, I'd say a lot of it comes down to just applying that organization and careful thought.
Okay. So, Gabby, can you see all the questions in the chat?
Yes. I see Jim saying thank you. Thank you, Jim.
Okay, so I guess everything is answered. Sorry, my little beaster is going around me, so I'm disappearing a bit. Hey. So now, Russ, Gabby, thank you so much for joining us. If someone will have any questions, feel free to tweet Gabby the dev. It's on Twitter, yeah?
Yep.